To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/back to reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.
Joanne Harris, lovely to speak to you today at Galantsfest. Are you having a good festival today so far?
I'm having a fabulous time. It's always fun at Galantsfest.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your career. Because well, I've been looking back at it because it's quite amazing. Your first book came out when you were 23 years old. Is that correct?
I can't remember how old I was, but it seems like a long time ago anyway.
Okay, right. And had you always wanted to be a writer?
Well, I'd always written, but, I'd been kind of convinced by various people that writing wasn't a proper job and you couldn't make a living doing it. And so a lot of my writing was done by stealth and nobody knew much about it.
And were you always writing as you were a child? Is that something did you get the bug quite early?
Always, yes. I realised that not all the stories that I wanted to read had been written, or some of them had been written incorrectly. And so I thought, I'll do this, I'll rewrite them. I'll change stuff. I'll invent my own things.
Now, your first book was The Evil Seed.
It was a vampire novel. It was written mostly to annoy my mother, who disapproved of horror immensely and who wouldn't allow it in the house.
And what was your feeling when you first got published? I mean, was it because it was quite a different industry back then? Everything seems to be an event these days. Was it something that kind of snuck out, or was it something that sort of...
Oh, there was no budget. There was no promotion of any sort. I was still teaching full time. So yeah, the budget was like a book of stamps. We used to have those in those days, and it was just, but it was unadulterated joy for me. I didn't do a single signing. I didn't do anything like that. But just the fact that it was there on the shelves. I used to go to the one bookshop in my town where the book was on sale. There was one copy. And I would hang around to see if it had been sold. And I'd move it around and put it on shelves so you could see the rather bad cover. And the bookshop owner kept staring at me. And I assumed it was because he recognised me, but actually he thought I was stealing books.
I used to be a bookseller. We used to have authors like you in all the time, so don't worry, it's well known. Your second book was Sleep, Pale Sister. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I hadn't really found my voice until my third book, and The Evil Seed was a sort of gothic horror pastiche with vampires. And the second one was a sort of Wilkie Collins rip-off in I think 5 first-person narrator voices. And it was good practice in many ways, but it wasn't really my voice. I was still kind of trying different voices out, which I think is a good thing for a young author to do. Young authors don't always have a voice of their own, and writing fanfic and writing pastiches of other things is sometimes a very good way of doing it. And so it was a better novel than The Evil Seed. And it was very ambitious in scope. It was all about, it was a ghost story set in the world of pre-Raphaelite art, but it wasn't quite me.
And then arguably, you really found your voice with your third book, Chocolat, and that must have changed everything.
Well, it changed everything, but not. I didn't expect it to. I was told that it wasn't going to sell, and that it was too parochial, and it was too weird, and it didn't fit into any conceivable category, and it was about things that are out of fashion. It wasn't really the third book that I'd written, but it was pretty much the moment at which the industry washed its hands of me. I'd tried lots of different things, and nothing had quite taken, and then this weird little book appeared, and nobody wanted to publish it for ages. And when it eventually did get published, as a sort of afterthought, nobody really expected it to do that well.
While you were writing it, did you think this is different, this is the one?
I knew it was different. It wasn't quite as different to me as it might have been to readers that had followed me, because I had tried a number of other things which were later published and rewritten. But I realised that I'd reached a kind of pivotal moment where I'd stopped writing coming-of-age novels disguised as horror stories or fantasy, and I had started to write about other things that were important to me, things like being a parent and where I'd come from and my family and where they'd come from. And so I think I'd stopped looking inwards as much as I'd started looking outwards.
And how did it change your life after that? In terms, not just your life, but your career. Did you did you get people picking up the phone that maybe didn't talk to you before, or?
Oh, and I'd never had anyone pick up the phone before. Before that, I'd had basically one fan letter from a woman in Pinner who had signed it from herself and all her cats. And that was, as far as I know, the only reader I had. I had what they called a cult following, which meant that I was largely unread. And all of a sudden with Chocolat, I was expected to do signings and tour, and there was a promotion budget. And I realized that I couldn't teach full time anymore. So I took some time off to see what happened, and I have never gone back. Fantastic.
I think for a lot of aspiring writers, that's the dream, to become a full-time writer. Were you prepared for it? Was there anything about it that shocked you, having to write full-time?
Oh, I wasn't remotely prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for any part of it. I wasn't prepared for the amount of free time I would suddenly have on my hands, and which I spent mostly watching Doctor Who and making toast.
Fantastic.
I wasn't prepared for the amount of scrutiny that I was going to get from the press. I was completely incapable of dealing with that. And of course, when the movie came out, and it came out very quickly after the book, it came out, just over a year after the book. The book had already been a bestseller, and I thought I was dealing with that. And then the movie came out, and it was just completely crazy because I was having to deal with it all over again on a much bigger scale. And it was wonderful, but it was also high anxiety.
And no one really trained you for that kind of success, do they?
Nobody ever does train you for success, because most of the time what they try to do is prepare you for failure. Nobody prepares you for success, because nobody really believes that it's going to happen on that scale that quickly. And so I was prepared to fail. That was fine. I was good at that. Being successful, I wasn't so good at. And so I kind of had a year of having awful panic attacks in very public places like St. James's Palace and the Oscars and things, where I would just flake out like Tony Soprano and just wake up lying on the floor thinking, how the hell did I get there? I got over it in the end.
Now, looking back to the young Joanne Harris who wrote The Evil Seed, or before that, what advice would you go back and give to her now?
I'm not sure she would have listened, which is a good thing. I think, I wasn't thinking about being published. I wasn't thinking about having a public or any kind of publication deal. I was just enjoying it. And I think the thing you have to do initially is not to write so that you can be a writer, but just write because you love writing. If you don't love it, nobody else is going to love it anyway. And the nebulous possibility of you ever being able to give up your day job and do it as a living is such an uncertain thing, and based on so many coincidences and combinations of luck and being in the right place at the right time, that you can't be certain of that. So whatever you do, if you don't enjoy the journey, then there is really not much point in doing it.
Now, Chocolat's success, probably for a lot of people, it was their first encounter with you as a writer, and it may have fixed the kind of writer that you are in their mind. So when you come along and you write something like Runemarks, how does that, what kind of reaction did you get from people for a book like that?
Well, I've had the same reaction with all of my new books. And now it's like 16, 17 books down the line, and I still get it every time. And there's always somebody who goes, wow, this is a departure. I've been doing different things all the time. I mean, the things that I do are linked thematically, and there are certain things that, in my view, make them not a million miles away from each other. But people who think very narrow kind of genre-based things about books tend to sometimes find it difficult when they find that I've written thrillers, that I've written, fantasy books. Basically, what I say is live with it. This is what I have done. This is what I will always do. I never promised that I would stay in one place. In fact, I pretty much promised that I wouldn't from the start, which is why it took me such a long time to get any sort of scrutiny, because if I had continued writing vampire novels, as they wanted me to, I would have been put in a vampire novel box. I would have been touted as the next Anne Rice, because everybody who wrote vampire novels was at the time, and I would have been thoroughly bored. So, I've always written kind of what I wanted to, and I've always been very lucky because I have a very loyal readership who are content to follow me into these kind of different places without complaining too much and without saying, why doesn't this one have chocolate in it?
Yes. Can we talk about your sort of daily habit as a writer? Are you, for a start, do you write every day?
I don't write every day, but I usually write every day. It kind of depends. Some days I just know it's not going to work. And I have stopped trying on those days because usually it's better if I do something else. Basically, I think that usually if I get blocked or if I am tired or if I know I'm not going to perform, it's much better me doing something different.
You're wonderful on social media, particularly your shed. Your shed that transforms every day. And
my shed has more fans than I do, I think, on Twitter.
The thing is, they're wonderful stories. They're wonderful short stories. Is that like a warm-up exercise for you? Is that something you do to get into a groove? Or is it...
It is a bit. It started off as a kind of Zen exercise. Where I had to concentrate on writing one sentence, and then once I'd written the first sentence, which happened to be on Twitter, then I would go off onto whatever I was doing. It has become something slightly different now. I write stories on Twitter, and I write them as I write them. You can watch me write them. I haven't written them before. I'm not just kind of posting them on having written them initially. But it's helped me a lot in terms of economy of words and of how sentences are constructed, and has made me think about things in a way that I wouldn't have done if I didn't have a 140 character limit. And so that's been very helpful. And I think it's actually affected my writing style outside of social media.
Yeah, me too.
We had Gospel of Loki last year, which was a big hit. Will we be seeing more in that universe, do you think?
Oh, yes. Yes, you will, because pretty much everything I've written in my fantasy genre is in that universe. The Norse myths had a universe of 9 worlds, which I wrote in for Runemarks and Runelight and the Gospel of Loki, but which I also think has expanded. Now, when I wrote Runemarks and Runelight, I didn't think I was going to write about actual Norse myths, and certainly not from Loki's point of view. But the one I'm writing now, which is basically the sequel to Gospel of Loki, is hopefully the thing that will kind of make this linear progression of books into a circle and make people understand that actually they were all linked, and hopefully will make sense of some of the kind of gaps that I have left in the narrative, and people will go, oh yeah, that's what she was getting at.
We've had the Writers' Festival was a big part of Galansfest, and we've got lots of aspiring writers here today. What are the sort of common mistakes you see young writers making that they can easily avoid?
I think sometimes I'm concerned when I see young writers worrying too much about marketing themselves, or trying to analyse the market, or trying to ride trends. I think those things are more or less irrelevant to a writer, and are probably doomed to disappointment, because as soon as you've isolated a trend, it will have gone by the time you've written a book that fits it, even if that were the book you were supposed to write. So I do think people worry overly about doing other jobs but their own. Christopher Priest was talking about this. I think, we need to remain in the writer's enclave and not to worry too much about being salesmen and marketeers and all the rest of it. I hear a lot of people saying that they don't have time to read, and yet they expect to write. Again, I think this is completely counterintuitive. You have to read so that you can write. And I think in a lot of different genres, I see a lot of younger writers who only really read within their genre, which means that they tend to miss out on the opportunity for flexibility and to explore other kinds of narrative. Besides, you don't know what you're going to get from what you read until you've read it. And if everything that you read is within your comfort zone, you're not going to be able to push that comfort zone as a writer. So that would help a lot. I mean, my comfort zone is fiction, and I have to push myself to read outside of fiction. And whenever I do, I am surprised at how rich it is, and how many ideas I get, and how much those ideas then inform what I'm writing.
If an aspiring writer came to you and you only had time to give them one single tip, what would that be?
Ditch the word aspiring.
Sorry.
It's bullshit. Just write. Don't worry too much about being a writer or the quality of what you write. Just do your best you can and be honest, and forget about the sort of the idea that writers are special people. If you write, then you are a writer.
That's fantastic. And what's next from you?
Well, I have a book of stories which are all basically set in the same universe and have returning characters, 100 stories, which I mostly wrote on Twitter. The collection is called Honeycomb. It has a sort of overarching storyline as well as having a lot of separate little stories. Charles Vess is illustrating it, so I'm waiting for him to do his work. Fantastic. And then hopefully, if everything happens on time, it will be out autumn of next year.
Wonderful. Great stuff. Well, Joanna Harris, thank you so much for your time. I know you're very, very busy today.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book? Quitting the day job? Becoming a best-selling author? Since 2016, we've interviewed and studied the advice of over 500 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 1 billion books. And in the Bestseller Academy, we've incorporated powerful and proven strategies for success, inspiring fiction and non-fiction authors just like you to reach new heights and write their best book ever. Ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, coaching, and the most inspiring and exclusive community of like-minded writers? Well, your bestseller dreams are just a click away. Join us today at bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. What a fascinating interview, Mark. Well, what a privilege it was to chat with Joanne. And there was so much that I picked up, quite a lot of surprises, actually. It's quite fascinating to listen to Joanne's story. And, you know, I loved her honesty. I loved how she explained how, you know, she wasn't really ready for her success. And I think a couple of things that really jumped out for me. The first thing was she talked about finding her voice. And that's not really something we've discovered. We've not really chatted about that in much detail in any of the previous episodes, but it's obviously a very important part of writing something that feels real and authentic. And I think that any novel, bestseller or not, if you haven't found that voice, it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a real struggle. So I think one of the crucial kind of questions that came up for me was, as Joanne said, that it took her until her third book, and she was really almost exploring the voice.
Yeah, well, I totally relate to that, because when I first started writing plays, because that's, you know, certainly when I was a kid, I was just aping movies I'd seen on TV. I used to write things that were just a rip-off of Star Wars and Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica. But when I started writing plays, I was, you know, I loved theatre but my writing was a bizarre hybrid of John Sullivan, who wrote Only Fools and Horses, and David Mamet, you know, if you can imagine such a bizarre crossbreed.
Yeah.
And it you know, you try on other people's shoes, you know, you try other stuff out. And like she said fanfic, you know, absolutely. And my daughter does it, you know, you write stuff you love. So maybe write that Harry Potter fiction if you love that. And if that helps you finish something and get to the end of something, you're never going to get published, but you will learn so much about structure and how sentences come together and just the nuts and bolts of writing a novel. And then eventually you'll be able to step forward and try and do something in your own voice. And it's taken me years to figure out what my own voice is and make myself feel comfortable putting it out there, because it is who you are, you know. And the biggest compliment I've had is people saying, "Oh, you know, your books they sound like, you know, you're there talking to me or whatever," and that feels great. That means I finally kind of figured it out.
Do you know, if I'm trying to think of an analogy, and what comes up for me is it's almost like in some ways having a wardrobe of clothing, and sometimes you have to put on a suit, and sometimes you have to wear a ball gown or
speak for yourself.
Well, yeah, absolutely. only on Sunday nights, but it's this idea that sometimes you feel constricted within certain clothing, like you're on show, or it doesn't feel very natural. And finding your voice to me sounds like finding that pair of jeans, that pair of shoes, and that t-shirt or shirt that you just love. And, you know, being a guy, I mean, this is, we whatever amount of clothes we have, we always pretty much wear the same thing over and over again. And so maybe finding the voice for an author is that kind of comfortable feeling of stepping into the shoes and putting on that pair of jeans that you just feel is you, and it's not trying to be anything else other than what you feel comfortable.
Very true. Once I discovered plaid shirts at Fat Face and blue jeans, that was it. I'm never wearing anything else.
Actually,
but what was interesting is the book where she did find her voice with Chocolat. It was the book that she was saying she was told it wasn't going to sell. It didn't fit in, but she knew it was different, and she wasn't chasing the market. She was like, sod them, I'm going to write what I love. And once she did that, there was something in it, her voice, that resonated with people, and suddenly she's selling 1 million copies and Johnny Depp is starring in your movie.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely a case of when you become authentic and you believe in what you're doing, you have to have that sense of almost stubbornness of knowing that this is what you want to do and you've got to march forward. And even if other people are telling you that she said, for example, it wouldn't sell, it didn't fit. And the point is that we always hear this over and over again about don't write for what's in current fashion because you'll miss it. And yet at the same time, you're saying, yes, but it doesn't fit. So there's this kind of conflicting story of what is in and what people are looking for. And should you write for the market, or should you write from the heart and write what you feel is important? And it sounds like Joanne really did that. And it obviously paid off, because whatever the magic that happened in amongst all of those things, it really connected with the readers, and then obviously connected with the viewers of Chocolat, that became a huge success as a film, didn't it?
Yeah, I guess there must be a certain element of luck there, in that your voice, just as you hit your stride, also happens to capture, the zeitgeist, what people suddenly want. But that said, Chocolat is still a book that sells now. It's still core stock for any bookseller, and it's still selling on and on and on. So she's obviously tapped into themes in that book that still chime with people all these years later. Going back to our original podcast, where suddenly we were worried we might have to write a Gone Girl style thriller because that's what was selling, or we would have to, write in a voice that might not be familiar to us. It's becoming clear we don't have to do that. All we have to do is capture the universal zeitgeist
in a bottle
and appeal to everyone in the English-speaking world, which, is a doddle.
Yeah, exactly. I think what it does come back to, though, one of the things that I'm discovering through this journey, but also I've done a lot of public speaking, and how do you connect with the audience through a story? And for me, it always comes back to this idea of a universal theme. And I think that, if you kind of put that at the core of what you're doing, even though, for example, zombie apocalypse isn't something everyone can associate with, if anyone, but what happens around that, the idea of saving your loved ones or going on a heroic mission, all of these things are human universal themes that we've all experienced to some level or other during our lives, even from young kids. So I think that's key. If you want to really reach a large audience, the more universal themes that you touch on, or the core universal theme you touch on, will really help to connect emotionally with the reader. But there's one other thing I just wanted to throw back, Mark, because she mentioned about fanfic, and I know that that's a kind of a buzzword, and for people that don't know, and this is my understanding of it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but fanfic stands for fan fiction, and it's the idea that somebody who loves, say, a Twilight novel or a Harry Potter novel actually writes a version of it, or a different outcome. Is that right?
They write a story set in that universe, fan fiction. I mean, it's been around for years, people have always aped other writers, and, you've perhaps most commonly, you have writers who will write Sherlock Holmes stories, for example, that's something that's been going on for years. Or they might attempt to write in the style of Dickens, or take Dickens. I mean, there was a TV series recently which had all the characters from Dickens, but in the same locale, and you'd see Fagin in the pub next to, and I can't think of a single other Dickens character at the moment, but people from different Dickens novels interacting. Or Star Wars does it. Like, in fact, the Lucasfilm did a great thing where they said, you can write any fan fiction you want, just don't make any money from it. Star Trek fans have been doing it for years as well, where and very often they'll take a path that maybe the main story doesn't take. So with Star Wars fan fiction, you might take a minor character who maybe only has one line in the films and follow them for a day and take them on an adventure. So and you can share it on things like Wattpad or whatever, and share with friends and get feedback. And I guess it's a way of, because a big chunk of writing is also world building and creating a universe. And if there's one already there waiting for you, and if you're familiar with it, then step on in, have a play. You're never going to make any money from it, but you could improve as a writer. I mean, famously, E.L. James, who wrote 50 Shades of Grey, that started as Twilight fan fiction.
That's what I heard. I heard that she wrote the book with all the characters of Twilight and then ended up kind of changing the names. Is that right? And then it kind of took off. So a bestseller can actually come out of fan fiction. But when would somebody choose to write fan fiction rather than write, say, an original book?
To imagine you've never written a book before, Mark. I know you've started several, but imagine you've never put pen to paper before. And it's a very intimidating prospect. And, we talked about it being this big monolithic thing that everyone's terrified of. And if you just want to, if you're familiar with the universe, then you can just slip on in there and have some fun, and it takes the weight off the creation side of things. It takes the weight off that. And I think it's a good way to practice. You find it with screenwriters as well. A lot, less so these days, but you used to find a lot in the 80s and 90s. Screenwriters would write an episode of Cheers on spec, send it to the makers of Cheers. Famously, Star Trek The Next Generation would take spec scripts. So if you were a big Star Trek nerd and you had an idea for an episode, you would write it on spec, send it to Paramount, and there were a couple that were actually made from people who, who were not established screenwriters but loved Star Trek, were passionate about it, wrote a particular kind of story, and they got made. So, I'm not saying that's going to happen to your novel, but, J.K. Rowling's not going to say, oh, you know what, you've written a much better ninth Harry Potter novel than I have. So
that's really interesting. I think it is worth mentioning. If you're listening to this and you've heard our challenge that obviously we're on of trying to write this novel in 52 weeks and publish it, and encouraging people to join us on this journey. And if you've been listening to us and you've been enjoying the shows, but you haven't actually decided to take part, there is an opportunity for you right now. Instead of, if you don't feel ready to write a book, or you don't think you're ready to write a book, then pick maybe one of your favorite novels and maybe start by rewriting the ending and make it the ending you always wanted, or write a fan fiction of one of your favorite novels, because that in itself could be a very valuable exercise just to get writing. But you just never know. I mean, just like you mentioned with E.L. James, I mean, that became one of the biggest selling series of books.
She wrote the first drafts of that on her BlackBerry.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, so no excuses, people. Get on with it.
So get along to the Facebook, the Bestseller Experiment Facebook page, and tell us if you're now inspired to try writing a fan fiction, and tell us what book you're writing it on. So share with us, and we'll maybe share a couple of the ones that come up on future episodes of the podcast.
And also share with us if you write Twitter fiction. Now, one thing I should explain is I was talking to Joanne about her shed. Now, if you follow Joanne Harris on Twitter, and you should, she is at Joanne Chocolat. There are mornings where she will say, because she writes famously in her shed, she's got a wonderful shed. She will say, today the shed is a ship on the ocean with a pirate captain, and we're headed. And she will just spin off a story, a magnificent story, in a series of tweets that, as she said, it started as a kind of Zen exercise, and now people have come to expect free stories from her every day. Brilliant. But she's it's a fantastic exercise. If you think you can do that, you can share your stories on Twitter. And she said that it's affected the way that she writes her regular fiction. Then maybe that's an exercise worth trying.
Has there been a bestseller that's come out of Twitter yet that you're aware of?
Don't think so. It's interesting. There are lots of actually, I guess so. I mean, the famous one was "Shit My Dad Says," which was that Twitter account about this guy who just tweeted the things that his dad said when he was watching TV. And it was hilarious. And it was a non-fiction bestseller. And there have been quite a few of those where people have, hit a groove, get a great idea and tweet. And then eventually a publisher comes along and says, we'll make a book of those. And I always wondered if because we had a few come in the office and they said, we should pitch for this. And I was like, but you can get this on Twitter for free. But people still buy the book because it's all in one place. It does form some kind of narrative. And of course, the one that everyone is talking about now is My Dad Wrote a Porno, which is not to plug someone else's podcast, but it's the top podcast on iTunes at the moment, about a guy who's discovered that his dad has written an erotic novel on Kindle called Belinda Blinked. And every week he and his friends read a chapter and then just crack up and analyze. And it's quite instructional. If you want to be a writer, it's quite instructional on how not to do it. It's filthy. It's absolutely filthy because it's a pornographic erotic novel, but it's just hilarious. And that they're bringing a book of that out soon. Basically, Belinda Blinked the novel, but with their annotations, and it looks hilarious. So yeah, there's lots of good fiction coming out of Twitter. Actually, now I think about it,
that's fantastic. So, what some of the other things that Joanna mentioned, which jumped out for me, were the first thing was how she said she wasn't trained for success, but she was, she was more prepared for failure, and I found that really interesting. I think there is I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this whole thing, and that.
Well, that's the British education system.
Well, yes, indeed. Well, no, it's not. I mean, I think it's education worldwide. It's even being parents. We tend to always. And teachers, it's always about catching kids doing things wrong, and no, don't do that. Put that down, and there's.
Don't get your hopes up.
Don't get your hopes up, and you'll never become anything. And there's so much negativity in the lives of us growing up that it's when people become adults, it's very difficult for them to unravel a lot of the things that they've been told as kids. And I live in this world where I believe anything's possible, and I try, hence doing this in crazy project. But in other things that I've done in my life, I've always gone for the idea of doing something crazy just to see if it's possible. And I think it's a very specific thing that Joanne brought up, which was that when we hit brick walls in our journey, if we're writers or musicians or whatever it is that we do, often that voice, that self-saboteur jumps out and tells us that we're always destined for failure and we were never going to become anything. And it's interesting just to say about how she had to spend a year of her life kind of getting used to this idea of success. And then when the film came out, she had to go through it all again. And I loved her openness about, the anxiety. But it's just that introspection that I think everyone, I feel as well is important for each author to think about how much of the self-saboteur that an author has in their head telling, oh, this is absolute rubbish, no one's ever going to like this. How much of that is actually other people's voices that we've picked up over the years, and we need to kind of close those voices down.
And what's remarkable about Joanne is she could have taken a very easy path and continued writing, as she says, vampire novels that weren't her voice. And you do often see, that you'll see best-selling authors, and I won't name any names, but there are authors who do seem to write the same book every single time because that's what's expected of them. And I think it's kudos to Joanne for not doing that, for writing something different. We talked about her book Runemarks, which was the first sort of Norse legend book that she wrote. And this is off the back of books like Chocolat, which are contemporary literature with a kind of romantic story in them, and stories about family. And now suddenly she's writing about Norse gods. And you just have to look at some of the reviews on Amazon with people going, oh, this isn't my sort of thing. I'm not going to read this. But, and you think, okay, well, fair enough if it's not your kind of thing, but it's what she wants to do. And she only has one career. She only has one life. And if that's what she's passionate about, then that's what she should write.
And it is quite, in some ways, I think it's fantastic that she, maybe it's because of that focus that she has on and being authentic and doing what she wants that has kept her at the top of her, the top of the charts for so long. But I also think that a lot of people listening might be thinking, oh, it's such a high risk, because if you know that something's worked, there is the temptation, and I know this from a music perspective when we had kind of charts hits and things, is there is a temptation to keep the template and, you know, tweak a few things, but keep the formula. So it's a hard one, because if you're trying to balance the idea of building a career as an author, full-time author who can, you know, spend their life writing in their shed or wherever it is, there's always that risk that if you veer too far away from what people loved, then you can alienate the core audience. But it sounds like Joanne's got this wonderfully loyal following who actually love the fact that she's willing to go with wherever she feels is the next right place for her, and that's incredible. I mean, all kudos for her for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, and not all of them have come with her, like I said, but she has found a new market. And that's where things like Glansfest are important, because you get people who love genre, you know, science fiction, fantasy, who come along and discover her, and then may go back and read her earlier books. They're kind of people who might not have even read Chocolat, you know, who go back and discover it. But it's interesting. I think all the artists I admire, and you know, talking about music here in particular, you know, the Kate Bushes, the David Bowies, the Pink Floyds, the Beatles, they didn't really repeat themselves. They kept moving forward and doing something different, you know. So I think there's a lot to be said, because that's the only way you can progress as an artist, is to try. And you are going to upset people. You're going to, you know, people do want the same but different. But
not
know,
that
you can
different
get stuck
as
in a
well,
rut.
right?
No,
there's that saying in music that if you're writing a song, it's you do something different, but not that different, so that you don't go too extreme, because then it kind of rocks the boat so much that nobody knows really what you're doing and what you're following. But having that difference, but keeping it within the sphere of comfort, if you like. But then in that way, that's maybe where books are very different from music. I think books, you know, you can write a completely different genre. Like you wouldn't, for example, you'd never hear David Bowie go from one album where he was doing, say, mainstream kind of pop and then try death metal. You wouldn't get that.
Actually, you would. I mean, if you listen to, you know, something like Tin Machine, which came along, is you know, the Beatles, you know, they're singing "We Love You," you know, "She Loves You," yeah, 1 minute, and then "Tomorrow Never Knows," you know, and it's like, whoa. So I think, again, it's not completely analogous because it's music. But maybe, you know, if you're a writer, you can experiment with short stories or whatever. But it's I think, you know, it behooves you. There's that word again. Behooves you as an artist to try something a bit daring, a bit different.
Well, also, if you don't, I guess you never know. You know, if you get success in one particular genre, could that be your genre, or could it actually be that that's just the beginning, and your main success or even bigger success could come in another genre? And I guess if you don't broaden your options or try something completely different, you'll never actually know. So there's that risk of staying within the box as well, which is very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be something you love. And, you know, talking to Shannon last time, you know, it's clear that she's very passionate about the genre that she writes for. But, you know, she's not writing the same thing again and again and again, because, again, her fans would pick her up on that, I think.
Absolutely. So, on the note of the film Chocolat, we have a question that came through on our email for a question of the week, and it kind of fits quite nicely with the fact that obviously Joanne's book then became a very big selling film, and something actually it's really interesting, and I love this question because I really wanted to ask it to you as well, being someone who writes scripts as well as novels. And so James from London, thank you so much for this question, and the question mark is should you start writing a script for a film and then write the book? Or is it best to work the other way around if you have a vision of wanting it to become eventually a movie?
Well, I think Juliette sort of answered this a couple of weeks ago, which is she said, just focus on one thing. It's I'm always saying to my kids, you know, they do one thing properly or several things badly. You know, my kids will be, you know, my son will try and brush his teeth while watching YouTube videos on his phone. You know, I'll be like, what are you doing? I'm multitasking. You know,
my son actually dropped my wife's iPod down the toilet. once and tried to fish it out with a coat hanger because he wouldn't put his hand in.
So the metaphor is don't drop your book in the toilet.
Absolutely.
I think it's right to and they're very different things to write. You know, a book. You usually have a finish line. You know, you get to a point where you've written your book, you've written several drafts, your editor's gone through it, your proofreader, your copy editor, and it's finished and it goes out to the world and people get to read it. Screenwriting is, as far as I know, the only written art form where your work is never read by the public at the end of it. It's read by the actors and the production team and everyone on the film. But, you know, apart from nerdy screenwriters like me, no one's going to sit down and read your script after sitting and watching, 90 minutes of your film. And your script is never really finished. It becomes something different. It goes from being sheets of paper to storyboards, to a finished, to scenes on a camera, on a, not on film anymore, but on digital usually. Then it becomes assembled into a film, and then it becomes the mistake a lot of first-time filmmakers make is, they'll see the first assembly of the film and they'll say, "Oh, but that scene is different to what I wrote. Let me have a look at the script here. It's different." And the directors and producers will go, "It's a film now. It's something completely different." And you are constantly, they say you write your film 3 times. You write it on paper, you write it while you're shooting, and you write it in post-production. And all through that process, you are rewriting, and you've got other people poking their noses in all the way through, making changes, actors, producers, making suggestions. You get a lot more either collaboration or interference, depending on who you're working with. For me, I've been very lucky. It's always very collaborative and very positive. But you hear horror stories from other, writers who've been locked out of the edit suite and stuff like that.
In a nutshell, Mark, I was just going to ask though, a burning question is, could there be, or do you know anyone that's ever done this, where they've written a script, like a screenplay, as a way of plotting out their dialogue and their plot for their book, and then purely doing it as an exercise to then have this kind of timeline of events with a lot of the dialogue already kind of worked out?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, Emma Donoghue, who wrote the book Room, while she was working on the edit for the book, wrote the screenplay. So when Hollywood came knocking at her door, normally the author is the last person who should probably write that book because they're so attached to it and they don't make compromises and, we can't lose that character, we can't lose that scene. Whereas for the purposes of film, sometimes you just have to do that. She had it ready and it was absolutely fantastic. Wow. Gillian Flynn as well. I mean, Gillian wrote Gone Girl, but she's been a TV writer previously, I think. So, she did a fantastic job of adapting her own book for film. So it does happen, but I don't know if anyone's done, because a script just isn't dialogue. This is something I hear a lot. People say, "Oh, the script was so corny." What they mean is the dialogue was so corny.
Right.
A script is not just dialogue. There's so much that goes into a script that's, it may only be 90 or 100 pages, and on the page it's far fewer words than you have in a novel. But I spent 4 or 5 years writing Robot Overlords, much longer than I've spent writing any novel. More words written for that than any novel I've ever written. Because there's so much world building on it. We were talking about how the robots worked, why they were here, and all that stuff we kind of swept under the carpet. John and I knew how it worked, but you don't want to bore the reader with it. Again, going back to what Juliette said about, historical authors will do their research and dagnammit, they're going to make sure you know it. We weren't going to bog the story because it's a kid's film. You don't want to bog the story down with all that detail, but we knew how the light stayed on, how the water was, how people got food, all of that, and just making sure that universe worked.
And that's a whole other episode, I think, isn't it? Because you hear about people that go into such huge detail of learning about their characters' background and the backstory and the traits. And
absolutely, I think certainly
in more detail. I think, yeah,
certainly your main characters, you need to get to know them like friends. You need to get to the point where you know exactly what they're going to say in any given situation. They'll still surprise you if they're any good, I think. But yeah, it's there's a lot of it's like a duck on a pond. It looks calm underneath, but its little legs are paddling underneath, and that's what it should be like. And people shouldn't be aware of all the of all the paddling underneath. They just want to sit back and enjoy a good story.
Excellent stuff. So 2 episodes ago, I was trying to convince Mark to move from slate and chalk for writing this novel on. Or what? Apple and Pages. Apple and Pages.
Apple Pages. An apple and pages a day keeps Word, MS Word away. There's nothing wrong with chalk and slate. Don't knock it.
I know.
But I'm quite enjoying Scrivener. Actually, it's good. I like the corkboard stuff, which is great, where you can put your little story beats up there, and it's like pinning things onto a board and being able to share that, and looking at the story beats and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm getting into a groove with this finally.
And I've only just you're only just starting to scratch the surface. That corkboard feature is fantastic because Mark and I are in the stage of kind of starting to plot out the parts of our novel, and we're using the corkboard to put down the main beats or scenes as well of our novel, and then we can move things around. But what I love about it is when you double click on one of the cards, you then have all of the more detailed information, so you can kind of drill down, and it's not all kind of one massive document. Oh, and do you know the way we're banging on about this, we should probably approach Scrivener for sponsorship. What do you think?
Well, I don't do anything for free, as you know. I'm being paid for this podcast, right? I haven't had any money from you yet, but I quit my day job. Did I mention that?
He lies.
Don't quit your day job, seriously.
No, I think I'm going to approach. I think I'm going to approach Scrivener because I've been banging on about them. I think they should sponsor this show. So Scrivener, if you're out there, expect a phone call. So we're going to be wrapping up this podcast very shortly, and I think before we finish off, I was just inspired by what Joanne was saying about this being prepared for failure, and I'd like to do a quick motivational minute on that because I think this is huge. As a coach. I see this all the time. So I'm going to do you ready to start the clock, Mark? 1 minute motivation.
3, 2, 1, rock.
All right. So when you are a child, you are told not to do stuff and you are told to give up on your dreams. And I see so often as a coach, that is the number one biggest block to people succeeding. And success could mean just finishing the book. It doesn't necessarily mean publishing it or even becoming a bestseller. Succeeding means, whatever specific goal you have today that you want to create. And I want you to observe over the next minute, and over the next week, as you write, as you take part in whatever it is you're doing, any goals and dreams you have, listen out for that self-sabotage voice that pops into your head and tells you that you're not good enough, the writing's not working, it's never going to happen, and you should just give up on your dreams, because that one tiny voice is the biggest destroyer of dreams, and I see it time and time again. But you can actually observe that voice and you can start to tell it to be quiet. It's not about getting rid of it. It's a practice every single day, almost like a Zen practice. Get that voice to just quieten down, turn down the volume on it, and observe when it talks, and don't listen to it like it's you speaking. It's an exceptionally different voice to who you are. And the more aware you become that it's separate, it's something that's trying to squish you down and kill your dreams, the more you will be able to start to tell it that, I don't want to have this conversation right now. And you can tell it to go and take a hike. So that voice that didn't prepare Joanne was more of a preparation for Joanne for failure. That is a voice we all have. Every single person has it. And it's just about quietening it every day. And once you get that voice quiet, then your world can really open up.
So that voice that's telling me this whole project will be a complete car crash, I shouldn't be listening to him.
Absolutely not.
He's quite loud, Mark.
I know. Well, I'm going to be honest here. I said everyone has that voice, and as a coach, I get very privileged to listen to people's stories every time we have. And we're actually all storytellers, incredibly good storytellers when it comes to telling ourselves how we can't do something and how we're going to fail. So take that incredible storytelling and turn it around for the better. And it is. It's so true, though. It's incredible how many people have got in the way of their own dreams and their own success because of all those things they were told when they were younger, which we replay in our heads like a tape recorder. Actually, there's science has proven that everything up to the age of 6 is recorded like it was recorded on a tape recorder. And then when we get to 6 years of age, we rewind and play it like a loop, sometimes for the rest of our life, which explains why some people, in the 80s and 90s are still dealing with issues which you think, you've had like 80 years to work this out, and still, it's something which everyone else can see is a major thing which brings that person down. So it's big for writing, because I think the creative muse and that voice can be very, very loud, like a megaphone for some people.
Yeah, and as a writer, you're often crippled with doubt as well. You're often, you'll always think that there isn't a single writer I know out there who hasn't at one time thought, I feel like a complete fraud. Someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and tell me, you're out. Come on, you're out the club.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
But no, keep positive. Speaking of positive thinking, we should tell our listeners that we finally have an idea. We're not going to reveal what it is, but we've been bouncing ideas back and forth for a story. We're very excited about it, having taken on some of the advice of the previous guests who've been all fantastic. So with the boulder is rolling, and like Indiana Jones, we're running in front of it, trying not to fall flat on our faces. So it's we're off, and to take Joanne Harris's wise words, we are going to ditch the word aspiring. It's bullshit. We are off. We are writers. We are writing. We're exchanging words. So here we go.
Absolutely. Watch this space. And we would love you to get involved as well. We're hoping that we're inspiring you to show you anything is possible. And if you go for it, join us. You've got a great excuse, 52 weeks to get that novel written. Maybe even publish it. We want to see at least one massive success come out of this podcast and celebrate with you if it's you. So come along, join us at the mailing list on bestsellerexperiment.com. And remember also to come and download the latest update of the Bestseller Experiment ebook, which we're giving away during the 52 weeks that we're doing this podcast. And then Mark aptly named it the Vault of Gold.
The Writer's Vault of Gold.
And we're
so like Indiana Jones, you can run out of the tomb with the Vault of Gold in your hand. And even if we get squashed by the giant boulder, hopefully you will cross the finish line and get a bestseller.
Or maybe we can get in the way of the boulder for everyone else.
Exactly. We'll take one for the team. So we're on Facebook with Bestseller Experiment. We're on Twitter at BestsellerXP. Mark and I are on Twitter too. I'm at Mark Stay, and Mr. Desvaux is at 4000 Saturdays, 4000 Saturdays. And please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes. That sort of stuff makes all the difference.
Absolutely. And we want to just say thank you so much to Joanne Harris for being part of the podcast today. Absolutely privileged to have her on the show. And that leaves us just to wish you an incredible week writing, living your dreams, as we all hope to. And it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.
See you guys.